December 9th, 1944, just before dawn. The Hürtgen Forest was already awake, not in the way forests usually are. There were no birds, no wind moving through branches, no distant artillery echoing across ridgelines. The forest did not announce itself. It waited. Dense, saturated with moisture, layered with pine needles and rotting leaves that swallowed sound and bent light into useless angles. Visibility rarely exceeded 40 yards, often less. In places, the canopy was so thick that even at midday, the ground remained in permanent twilight. For weeks, German units had turned this terrain into a killing system. Snipers from elements of the 275th Infantry Division and attached specialist teams had carved firing hides directly into the forest itself. They cut shallow slits into embankments. They hollowed fallen trunks from the inside. They tunneled into root balls overturned by shell fire. Moss was replaced carefully, bark reseeded by hand, leaf litter brushed back into place. Every hide was positioned to cover a narrow approach lane, a bend in a trail, a shallow rise where an advancing soldier would instinctively slow down. The Germans did not fire often. They did not fire carelessly. They fired only when the outcome was certain. American infantrymen moving through the Hürtgen had a phrase for it. If it moves, it dies. If it doesn't move, it might still die. Entire platoons learned to freeze in place for hours. Medics were killed reaching wounded men. Radio operators were shot the moment they raised an antenna. Even veteran officers stopped standing upright. The forest punished habit. It punished confidence. It punished anything that looked like normal soldiering. German sniper doctrine thrived here because the environment removed variables. There were no long sight lines to manage, no skyline silhouettes, no reliable echoes to trace shots. Muzzle flashes vanished beneath the canopy. Smoke clung low to the ground. Every factor that complicated marksmanship in open terrain was neutralized. What remained was discipline. The German snipers did not chase kills. They controlled space. Their goal was paralysis. Every American movement slowed. Every decision took longer. Every advance stalled. And as time stretched, cold, hunger, and exhaustion did the rest. The forest itself became an auxiliary weapon. By early December, entire sectors of the American line were barely holding. Divisions rotated in and out, but the outcome did not change. The Hürtgen absorbed them all. At 5:30 a.m. on December 9th, Sergeant William Ashworth crawled into position behind a shattered oak stump and decided that this assumption, that the Germans owned the forest, was unacceptable. Ashworth was not new to combat. He had already survived Normandy. He had already learned what German snipers looked like when they were confident and what they looked like when they were afraid. He knew the difference between randomness and pattern. And as he pressed his body into the wet earth, rifle wrapped in burlap, breath slowed to match the rhythm of the forest, he understood one thing immediately. Traditional counter-sniper tactics would not work here. Waiting for a German sniper to make a mistake was suicide. They did not expose themselves without purpose. Hunting blindly through the undergrowth was worse. Every step forward risked stepping into a kill lane that had been measured weeks earlier. Even drawing fire to triangulate a position was ineffective. The Germans fired too rarely. They relocated too efficiently. And they understood patience better than the men sent to uproot them. Ashworth did not argue with doctrine. He simply stepped outside of it. Before his spotter, Corporal Joseph Kowalski, could fully settle the binoculars into place, Ashworth slid 13 careful steps to the left. Not to a fortified position, not to concealment, to something else entirely. A position that looked plausible. A shallow depression near a fallen branch. The kind of place a careless rifleman might choose if he did not know better. It was not good cover. It was convincing cover. Ashworth did not intend to fire from there. From his pocket, he removed a small cardboard matchbox. Common issue, wooden matches. The cheapest kind. The sort of object soldiers barely noticed anymore. He struck one. The flame lasted no more than 3 seconds. Then he extinguished it, slid back to his true firing nest, and did not move. That moment, those 3 seconds, is where most retellings fail. The match was not bait. Ashworth was not trying to lure a German sniper into firing at light. He was not hoping for panic or recklessness. He was measuring something. Light in the Hürtgen Forest was not noise. It was instruction. German sniper training emphasized 3 primary indicators of enemy presence: movement, sound, and light. In the Hürtgen, movement was minimal and often indistinguishable from natural shifts in foliage. Sound was distorted, dampened by terrain and absorbed by layers of wet earth and pine needles. Light, however, remained absolute. A spark, a reflection, a flicker. Even the smallest anomaly demanded orientation. Ashworth understood this instinctively. A match flame created a predictable reaction. Predictable reactions produced predictable exposures. Predictable exposures could be exploited with mechanical precision. The German sniper who died first never knew he had participated in a test. Ashworth did not rush the shot. He watched. He counted. He observed how long it took for the forest to respond. Not with movement, but with absence. A faint stillness where stillness did not belong. A microscopic disruption in the geometry of branches. A fractional adjustment of perspective that betrayed a human eye aligning with light. When Ashworth fired, it was a single round. There was no return fire. No panic. Just a quiet collapse somewhere inside the undergrowth. What mattered was not the kill. What mattered was confirmation. German doctrine was intact. German reflexes were intact. German predictability was intact. Ashworth made a small notation in his notebook. Not a tally, not a boast. Data. Kowalski finally whispered, his voice barely disturbing the air between them. "What are we doing?" Without looking up, Ashworth answered, "Finding them faster than they can find us." That sentence marked the true beginning of the engagement. Most snipers attempt to disappear into terrain. Ashworth disappeared into behavior. The first match had not merely revealed a shooter. It had exposed the German mental model. Their training forced them to prioritize light above all else. Even when discipline restrained movement, orientation remained automatic. Heads turned, eyes adjusted, attention shifted. And in that shift, camouflage failed. Ashworth stopped seeing the forest as geography. He saw it as circuitry. If light appeared here, where would attention flow? If attention flowed there, what position would adjust? If a pattern emerged, who would respond, and how quickly? Every reaction became feedback. Every silence became information. Every confirmed kill refined the model. To an average infantryman, the forest was chaos. Branches, fog, shadows, fear. To Ashworth, it was a decision tree. And at the end of every branch was the same question. Where will they look next? Not where are they hiding, not where will they fire from. Where will their training force them to focus? Timing became everything. Ashworth measured how long it took for a German to notice the flame, how quickly they adjusted their angle, how completely they compromised their concealment in doing so. Kowalski watched him track these micro-movements with the calm focus of an engineer refining a design. "This isn't sniping," Kowalski murmured once. "This is prediction." Ashworth finally glanced at him. "Sniping is prediction," he said. "The Army just teaches the slow version." By mid-morning, Ashworth had identified 2 additional sniper hides and 1 observer position without a single American round coming back toward his sector. He had not advanced. He had not revealed himself. He had not chased targets. He had made the enemy behave. The logic was ruthless. If you understand how a soldier thinks, you understand how he reveals himself. And if you control the reveal, you control the kill. This was the threshold. Ashworth was no longer improvising. He was no longer testing an idea. He had identified a structural flaw in German tactical psychology, and he intended to exploit it fully. The matchbox was not a trick. It was an interface. A way to convert doctrine into vulnerability. A way to reduce lethal combat into a solvable equation. By noon, Ashworth was no longer asking whether it would keep working. He was asking how far he could push it. For the first time in days, the Hürtgen Forest felt less like a trap and more like a machine he had learned to operate. And the Germans did not yet understand that the thing killing them was not the rifle. It was their own obedience. By the afternoon of December 9th, the Hürtgen Forest had not changed. The light was still weak. The ground was still wet. The German sniper network was still in place. What had changed was the way the forest was being read. German sniper doctrine was not improvised in the field. It was the product of nearly a decade of institutional refinement. From the Reichswehr manuals of the interwar period to the combat-tested revisions of 1941 and 1942, German fieldcraft emphasized restraint, concealment, and above all, control of sensory cues. A sniper was not a hunter in the romantic sense. He was a sensor. His role was to detect, fix, and paralyze enemy movement. Kills were secondary to influence. This doctrine assumed something fundamental, that the battlefield presented more information than a human mind could fully process. The sniper's task was to reduce that chaos into manageable signals. Movement, sound, light. Those were the categories. And among them, light was the most reliable. Movement could be natural. Wind shifted branches. Animals crossed paths. Smoke drifted unpredictably. Sound was unreliable in forests, distorted by terrain and absorbed by vegetation. Light, however, behaved according to physics. It cut through disorder. It demanded attention. It could not be ignored without deliberate effort. German training reinforced this relentlessly. Recruits were drilled to orient instantly toward flashes, reflections, and sudden changes in illumination. A match, a cigarette ember, a glint off metal. Each was treated as a potential firing solution. The reflex became automatic long before combat. Ashworth understood none of this academically. He understood it behaviorally. From his firing nest, he did not watch for enemies. He watched for responses. The forest was no longer a place to search. It was a system to probe. Every match he struck was an input. Every adjustment in the undergrowth was an output. Over time, the relationship between the two became clear. Ashworth was not mapping terrain. He was mapping attention. Behind the shattered oak, he adjusted his position slightly and struck another match. This time, he placed it lower, closer to the ground, partially shielded by bark. The flame was dimmer, shorter, less obvious. He extinguished it and waited. The response took longer. That delay mattered. It told him something about distance, angle, and priority. German observers closer to the false position reacted quickly. Those farther away hesitated. Some did not move at all. That absence was information too. When the shot came, it was again singular, controlled, unanswered. Kowalski began to understand what he was witnessing, though not fully. He watched Ashworth's eyes, the way they did not dart or scan, but settled patiently on empty spaces, waiting for something to be wrong. This was not how snipers were taught to look. There was no tension in it, no searching, just expectation. German sniper teams typically operated in pairs or trios. A shooter, a spotter, sometimes an observer positioned slightly offset to monitor flanks. Their hides were designed to support each other. Killing one rarely neutralized the threat. It simply alerted the others. Ashworth accounted for this without changing his behavior. He did not move after firing. He did not adjust his nest. He did not attempt to exploit confusion. Instead, he struck another match, again from a false position, this time at a different angle entirely. The flame appeared where no reasonable sniper would be expected to be. The response was immediate and wrong. A German observer shifted to compensate, overcorrecting toward the new stimulus. The movement was minimal, almost imperceptible, but it broke symmetry. It revealed hierarchy. The observer moved before the shooter. That told Ashworth who was driving the team's awareness. The bullet followed the behavior. By mid-afternoon, Ashworth had identified not only individual hides, but the relationships between them. He knew which positions overlapped fields of fire. He knew which teams shared observers. He knew which angles were considered priority by German doctrine and which were considered secondary. The forest had become readable. This was the critical inversion. German snipers relied on the assumption that concealment was the primary defense. Ashworth bypassed concealment entirely. He did not try to see through camouflage. He forced camouflage to betray itself. Light was not used to attract fire. It was used to reorganize perception. Kowalski whispered once, "They're not firing back." "They don't need to," Ashworth replied quietly. "They think they're still hidden." That belief was the system sustaining them. German sniper training taught that invisibility equaled safety. If a position had not been fired upon, it was assumed secure. Ashworth exploited that assumption mercilessly. His false positions were never engaged. They were merely observed. And observation, in this context, was lethal. Each match refined the model further. Ashworth learned how long German teams waited after seeing light before adjusting. He learned how quickly they recentered their focus. He learned how discipline restrained movement but could not eliminate orientation. This distinction was everything. Discipline could suppress action. It could not suppress attention. Ashworth's kills were becoming almost incidental. What mattered was the map forming in his mind. A dynamic representation of how German snipers thought, prioritized, and reacted under stimulus. Once that map was complete, the outcome of individual engagements was no longer in question. The method was brutally efficient because it was not dependent on surprise. It was dependent on certainty. By late afternoon, German sniper activity in Ashworth's sector had diminished noticeably. Not because the network was destroyed, but because its focus had shifted. Attention had been pulled away from advancing infantry and redirected toward phantom threats that never materialized. Ashworth had not removed the danger, he had displaced it. As daylight faded, the forest grew darker, and the Germans' reliance on light intensified. Ashworth understood what that meant. The system was becoming more rigid, not less. Rigid systems do not adapt quickly. They break. Kowalski asked the question that lingered unspoken between them. What happens when they figure it out? Ashworth did not answer immediately. He watched the forest settle into its evening stillness, the way attention redistributed itself along expected paths. They will, he said finally, but not today. Doctrine doesn't change in a day. That night, Ashworth did not sleep. Not from fear, but from calculation. He knew the Germans would respond. Orders would come down, adjustments would be made, and when they were, the system would reveal new weaknesses. The matchbox still felt light in his pocket. Tomorrow, he would push it further. Long before William Ashworth struck a match in the Hürtgen Forest, the idea behind it had already taken shape in a place that had nothing to do with war. Harlan County, Kentucky. It was not a landscape that rewarded confidence. It was coal country, where the ground itself punished assumptions. Mines collapsed without warning. Gas built invisibly in sealed tunnels. Timber shifted under pressure. Men who trusted rules instead of patterns died quietly and were rarely found whole. Ashworth grew up learning that danger was not dramatic. It was procedural. In the mines, survival depended on noticing what others ignored. The way airflow changed before methane accumulated. The sound timber made when it carried too much weight. The smell that meant a pocket of gas was forming behind a wall that looked solid. These were not skills taught formally. They were absorbed through consequence. Miss one signal and the mine corrected you permanently. Ashworth learned early that the world was not lethal because it was chaotic. It was lethal because it followed rules people refused to acknowledge. That mindset followed him everywhere. By the time he was 12, he hunted rabbits not by tracking bodies, but by tracking decisions. Where they froze, when they bolted, how far they ran before stopping. He did not guess. He forecast. Every shot was preceded by an expectation of behavior, not an assessment of distance or wind. By 17, Ashworth did not describe himself as a marksman. He described himself as someone who watched. That distinction mattered. When his father was killed in a mine collapse, Ashworth inherited something heavier than grief. He inherited responsibility. Awareness was no longer personal. It was duty. If he failed to notice something, others paid the price. That sharpened his perception permanently. Attention became moral. When the army came calling, the rifle was not attractive because it allowed killing. It was attractive because it allowed consequence. A way to convert awareness into action without intermediaries. At Camp Perry, instructors praised Ashworth's shooting. His scores were consistent, calm, unremarkable in the way professionals often are. What unsettled them was how he framed problems. Where other recruits asked how to hide better, Ashworth asked what caused detection in the first place. Where doctrine emphasized invisibility, he saw a dead end. If both sides were invisible, the side that waited lost initiative. And initiative, Ashworth believed, was survival. He asked questions doctrine did not like. What if you could force an enemy to reveal himself without firing? What if concealment itself could be used against the concealed? The answers were dismissive. Sniping, he was told, required patience, erasure. Never bait, never manipulate, never announce presence. Ashworth did not argue. He logged those answers quietly, the way he logged everything else. Another system, another structure waiting to be reversed. Normandy validated his instincts. German snipers there were disciplined, experienced, and cautious. Ashworth survived not by being faster or braver, but by understanding how long German teams waited before repositioning, how they favored certain angles, how their observers behaved under stress. He did not win by reacting. He won by arriving at the moment his opponent's training demanded action. 17 confirmed kills later, the lesson was clear. German marksmanship was not the threat. German predictability was. The Hürtgen Forest broke every conventional extension of that logic. There were no reliable sightlines, no stable sound cues, no muzzle flashes, no movement windows. The tools Ashworth used to read behavior in open terrain were stripped away. A sniper who relied on patience here weighted himself into irrelevance. A sniper who relied on stealth became static, and static positions died. Ashworth understood this before firing his first shot. The only way out was inversion. If the Germans refused to reveal themselves, he would create the condition that forced them to. Not through noise, not through movement, not through decoys. Through the one reflex they could not suppress: orientation to light. This was not cleverness. It was inevitability. A match was not a weapon. It was a lever. A stimulus embedded so deeply in training that it bypassed conscious restraint. German snipers could choose not to fire. They could not choose not to look. Ashworth did not seek brilliance. He sought certainty. Certainty that doctrine had not adapted. Certainty that instinct would override caution. Certainty that once attention shifted, exposure followed. By the time he struck the first match on December 9th, nothing about the idea was improvisation. It was the convergence of everything he had learned. Mines, hunting, training, Normandy, the forest itself. The first kill proved the idea. The second proved the system. By mid-morning, Ashworth was no longer experimenting. He was collecting data. Each match revealed response times. Each response revealed hierarchy. Each kill refined the model. The forest still held dozens of German snipers. Ashworth intended to map them all. He repositioned only when terrain demanded it, never because a pattern felt complete. Patterns in the Hürtgen were illusions. German hides were built in clusters, overlapping arcs designed to punish complacency. Killing one sniper often meant two more had perfect view of the firing position. Ashworth accounted for that by never firing from where attention was focused. His second engagement followed the same structure. A false position 15 yards from the true nest. A single match. 3 seconds of flame. Silence. Kowalski watched the tree line, expecting chaos. There was none. Nothing, he whispered after 20 seconds. Wait, Ashworth replied. German observers did not move quickly. They moved correctly. At 45 seconds, Kowalski saw it. A fractional shift in a brush pile, less than an inch, but that inch represented a head adjusting angle, a trained response to stimulus. Ashworth fired once. The body collapsed without sound. 90 seconds later, the third kill came. A spotter reacting to the same false position. 2 engagements, 4 bodies, 0 German shots fired. This was no longer sniping in the conventional sense. It was extraction. By noon, Ashworth had repeated the cycle 4 more times, deliberately, methodically. Each match answered a question. How wide were their arcs? Who moved first? How long did they linger? How did terrain distort their reactions? Kowalski's initial exhilaration gave way to something colder. He began counting seconds. "Bill," he whispered once, "every time you light that thing, they're aiming at the wrong place in under half a minute." 7 seconds, Ashworth corrected. "That's the average." "That doesn't scare you?" "It should scare them more." Because Ashworth was not gambling with his life. He was gambling with their assumptions. German snipers trusted their concealment because it had always worked. But concealment was irrelevant if Ashworth never looked for them directly. He forced the hides to betray themselves. He narrowed the battlefield to funnels of expected behavior. By sundown, the picture was clear. 14 confirmed kills, 2 additional hides identified but left untouched. German sniper fire in the sector had dropped sharply, not because they had stopped observing, but because they were observing the wrong places. That night, as they scraped shallow cover into the frozen ground, Kowalski voiced what he feared most. What if they adapt? Ashworth did not hesitate. Good. Adaptations are predictable too. Doctrine was the one opponent Ashworth trusted completely, and tomorrow, Doctrine would try to correct itself. Dawn on December 10th arrived without color. The fog did not roll in. It assembled. One moment the trees were visible as vertical shapes. The next, they dissolved into a uniform gray mass that erased depth and distance. Visibility collapsed to 30 yards in places, less in others. Moisture clung to uniforms and weapons alike. Sound lost direction. Angles lied. For most snipers, fog was a barrier. It flattened terrain, erased reference points, and turned marksmanship into guesswork. Doctrine treated it as a pause condition. You waited it out. Ashworth recognized it as amplification. The previous day, the match had revealed individual hides, but it had done so symmetrically. The Germans saw the light as clearly as Ashworth could infer their reaction. Fog broke that balance. In haze, light traveled farther than shape. A flame pierced the gray long before a human outline could. It created a temporary asymmetry, brief, fragile, but decisive. Ashworth understood it instantly. Yesterday, he had used the match to trigger orientation. Today, he could use it to force prioritization. He did not begin with one match. Before sunrise, he and Kowalski crawled into a shallow, bowl-shaped depression overlooking a tangle of fallen timber. Intelligence suggested the area housed at least 2 shooters and a spotter. The terrain made sense. Overlapping arcs, natural concealment, control of approach lanes. Ashworth did not look for silhouettes. Shapes were irrelevant. What mattered was where trained men believed threats originated. He struck the first match 40 yards north of their true position. 2 seconds of flame. Out. 30 seconds passed. He struck the second match 30 yards west. Same duration. Out. Kowalski whispered, "Nothing yet." "Wait," Ashworth said. 8 seconds later, The third match flared 20 yards south. This was the first true stress test. One stimulus triggered orientation. 2 demanded attention. 3 forced choice. And choice, under training pressure, was where behavior became rigid. Within the fallen timber, Kowalski saw it. A faint adjustment, then another. 2 separate shifts from 2 separate positions, each attempting to reconcile 3 light sources and determine which represented the primary threat. Ashworth did not fire. 3 matches had identified them. The 4th would expose them. He crawled forward, not toward the Germans, but laterally, angling himself to sharpen his line of sight. Then he struck the 4th match and planted it openly on a strip of bark. The flame burned clear and steady, barely 25 yards from the German hide. This was not bait. It was command. No training prepares a soldier to ignore a threat that close to his kill zone. The only variable left was speed. The response was immediate and fatal. 2 silhouettes shifted simultaneously. Sniper and spotter, both breaking concealment to realign for a countershot. Ashworth was already settled. The rifle spoke once. The first figure dropped. Less than a second later, the second shot followed. The spotter fell. A third German attempted to withdraw deeper into the brush. The third round caught him mid-step. 11 seconds. 3 bodies. No German fire. Kowalski exhaled slowly, as if surfacing from deep water. "That wasn't sniping," he said. "That was execution." Ashworth shook his head slightly. Pattern pressure. Fog allowed him to escalate. Instead of creating a single focal point, he created sequences. Orientation, adjustment, confirmation, exposure. It was mechanical, predictable, devastating. By 0800 hours, Ashworth had executed 3 multi-match sequences. By noon, 19 Germans were dead. But the significance was not numerical. It was structural. The day before, he had pulled out snipers. Now, he was pulling out observers, radio men, machine gun crews, anyone trained to monitor visual anomalies. The match no longer attracted individual eyes. It attracted systems. German soldiers were reacting collectively. "They're not adapting," Kowalski muttered at one point. "They're doubling down." "They can't stop," Ashworth replied. "Light discipline is how they survive. Fog makes that instinct stronger." He was no longer fighting German snipers. He was fighting German training architecture. That realization changed everything. A sniper could adapt. Doctrine could not. Day 2 was not about kills. It was about proof. Proof that if you controlled what a soldier looked at, you controlled the soldier. By sunset, the forest no longer felt contested. It felt instrumented. December 11th brought the inevitable response. German commands finally acknowledged something was wrong. Orders went out across the sector. Do not react to light. Do not adjust position. Do not turn your head. Ignore matches completely. On paper, it was correct. Eliminate the reflex, eliminate the vulnerability. Paper solutions do not survive contact. Kowalski intercepted fragments of the briefing over radio chatter. "They're telling them not to look," he whispered. "That kills the trick." Ashworth was already moving. "No," he said. "It opens a new one." When you order men not to react to a stimulus, you isolate that stimulus. And once isolated, it becomes illumination. Ashworth's next evolution was not bait or sequencing. It was inversion, backlighting. A sniper hiding in shadow is invisible because light falls in front of him. Reverse the direction of light, and the same sniper becomes a silhouette. Geometry replaces guesswork. At 0630 hours, the fog thinned slightly, but canopy cover remained heavy. Shadows deepened. Visibility was poor. Perfect conditions. Ashworth identified a machine gun nest that had pinned an American platoon for 2 days. He did not fire. He did not call artillery. He studied it. The angle of logs, the depth of the firing slit, the likely fallback route. Then he moved behind it. 40 yards wide, a narrow seam where brush opened just enough to create a corridor of light. Kowalski watched, confused. "Why back there?" "That's where the light needs to be," Ashworth answered. He struck a single match behind his shoulder. 3 seconds. In those 3 seconds, the flame did not illuminate the Germans. It illuminated the space between them and Ashworth. 3 heads, 2 shoulders, 1 firing aperture projected briefly against the glow. Ashworth extinguished the match. 7 seconds. 3 shots. The machine gun fell silent. "That wasn't a trick," Kowalski said quietly. "That was X-ray vision." "Doctrine inversion," Ashworth replied. By midday, inversion defined the fight. German units refusing to look at light could not see what light revealed behind them. Ashworth reconstructed positions with surgical clarity. Then he integrated the system with artillery. A captured radio intercept referenced a German company headquarters, hidden, protected, a poor infantry target, a wasteful artillery one, unless you could draw men out first. Ashworth placed 3 match positions in a triangle around the command post, each 60 yards from the true location. He lit them sequentially, simulating movement. The Germans responded exactly as headquarters staffs always did. Officers emerged, runners moved, radio men checked lines. Lieutenant McKenna, the artillery observer, saw it unfold. "Bill," he whispered, "is that what I think it is?" "Yes." "Do it again." 6 rounds of 105 millimeters followed. The headquarters vanished. Estimated casualties exceeded 20. Coordination fractured instantly. "I'm not killing snipers anymore," Ashworth said flatly. "I'm killing systems." By nightfall, German coordination in the sector had collapsed. Communications faltered. Patrol timing broke. Machine gun emplacement discipline eroded. Units relocated in panic. All because the enemy misunderstood one thing. The match was never the trick. Their reaction to it was. By the morning of December 11th, German commanders in the Hürtgen sector finally understood that they were not facing an unusually skilled American sniper. They were facing a problem their doctrine could not describe. Men were dying without firing. Positions were being neutralized without direct engagement. Headquarters were being located without reconnaissance patrols. Sniper teams reported no visible enemy, no muzzle flashes, no movement. Only brief, inexplicable flickers of light, followed by death. The first corrective order had been simple. Do not react to light. It was the correct response on paper. If light was being weaponized, then discipline must suppress the reflex. German doctrine had always believed that training could override instinct. That belief now became its greatest liability. Because when a reflex is forbidden, it does not disappear. It becomes isolated. Ashworth understood this immediately. When men are ordered not to respond to a stimulus, they must actively suppress awareness. And suppressed awareness creates blind zones. Blind zones could be exploited. Ashworth did not strike matches to provoke reactions anymore. He struck them to reveal absence. In terrain dominated by shadow, light did not need to be observed by the enemy to be useful. It only needed to exist at the correct angle. Backlighting became his primary tool. A sniper refusing to orient toward light also refused to adjust to its geometry. He remained fixed in shadow, unaware that his silhouette was being outlined against a temporary glow behind him. Ashworth did not need German reflexes anymore. He needed German obedience. The first demonstration came just after sunrise. An American platoon had been pinned for 2 days by intermittent fire from a concealed German position. Previous attempts to flank had failed. The Germans had overlapping coverage. Approaches were lethal. Ashworth studied the position for nearly 40 minutes. He did not look at the firing slit. He looked at where light would travel if introduced behind it. He moved wide, crawling through wet undergrowth until he reached a narrow corridor where the canopy thinned just enough. He struck a single match and held it low, behind his shoulder. The Germans did not look. They obeyed their orders. In those 3 seconds of flame, Ashworth saw everything he needed. Heads outlined briefly, a shoulder, the negative space of a firing aperture revealed by contrast. When the match died, the forest returned to shadow. The Germans remained unaware. 3 shots followed. The machine gun fell silent. Kowalski, watching through binoculars, whispered, "They never even moved." "Exactly," Ashworth replied. That moment marked the death of German adaptation. Every corrective order now created a new vulnerability. When Germans stopped reacting to light, they lost situational awareness. When they tried to compensate by relying on sound, the forest betrayed them. When they froze to avoid exposure, they became static targets. Ashworth escalated again. By midday, he began integrating the Matchbox system with indirect fire not as bait, but as diagnostic illumination. He used light to force predictable command responses. Officers emerged to verify reports. Runners moved to relay orders. Radio men adjusted antennas. Each movement was brief. Each was enough. Artillery did the rest. The Matchbox had become a battlefield interface. Kowalski finally said what had been building in his mind for hours. "They're not adapting. They're unraveling." "They can't adapt," Ashworth replied. "They're trying to fix behavior with rules. Behavior doesn't obey rules under pressure." That afternoon, German units attempted a final, desperate adjustment. Patrols were ordered to hunt the American sniper aggressively. No waiting, no concealment. Advance in teams, close distance. Kill him before he could manipulate the environment again. It was the first genuinely intelligent response, and the last one that mattered. Because this was the moment Ashworth stopped waiting for reactions and began dictating movement. He no longer needed Germans to reveal themselves from hides. He needed them to move through terrain he had already shaped. He prepared the ground carefully. Over the course of an hour, Ashworth placed match positions across a 100-yard stretch of forest. Not randomly. Each was placed where a pursuing soldier might pause. A stump, a rock outcrop, a dip in the ground, a break in undergrowth. The matches themselves were not the lure. The story they told was. When the German patrol entered the sector, they did not scan for light. They scanned for Ashworth. That made them predictable. Predators always are. The first match flared briefly near a stump, then another near a rock, then silence. The pattern suggested a retreating sniper. Careless, hurried, making mistakes. The Germans followed. They advanced professionally, spacing correct, sectors covered, rifles ready. But they were following a path no American had walked, only the illusion of one. Ashworth waited until 4 of the 5 men were committed to the shallow bowl he had chosen. No cover, no lateral escape, no concealment. Then he fired. The lead scout fell. The patrol leader pivoted and died. A 3rd man dropped, diving for cover that did not exist. The 4th fell mid-stride. The 5th turned to run and collapsed before reaching the tree line. 45 seconds. 5 bodies. No German shot returned. Kowalski stared. That wasn't counter-sniping. No, Ashworth said. That was routing behavior. He repeated the method twice more that afternoon. Each time, fewer Germans followed. By late day, patrols hesitated at the edge of match trails. Hesitation became the new tell. Where they paused, Ashworth aimed. The final test came unexpectedly. At 1300 hours, a single match flared to Ashworth's left. Clean. Deliberate. Kowalski froze. "Bill, he's using your signal." Ashworth did not move. "He's using my language." The German sniper lit a second match 10 minutes later. Different angle, different elevation. He was mapping Ashworth, measuring response time, attempting to reverse the system. 2 predators. Same method. Neither willing to make the first mistake. For nearly 2 hours, no shots were fired. Then Ashworth broke symmetry. He lit 3 matches simultaneously from 3 separate positions. No single man could do that. The stimulus exceeded what the German mind could attribute to one source. Training collapsed into information gathering. The German shifted slightly, just enough to orient. Ashworth fired once. The duel ended. "If he'd been luckier, we'd be dead," Kowalski said. "Luck is the tax on imperfect systems," Ashworth replied. By nightfall, German discipline in the sector was gone. Something worse had replaced it. Fear. Not fear of Ashworth. Fear of light. By the morning of December 12th, the Hürtgen Forest had acquired a new inhabitant. It was not an American sniper. It was not an artillery battery. It was fear. Not fear of being hunted. Fear of reacting. The first reports surfaced quietly. German survivors from the previous days whispered warnings to incoming units. Do not look at sparks. Do not track flickers. Do not turn your head towards sudden light. At first, officers dismissed the claims as battlefield nerves, the predictable anxiety of men under pressure. But as hours passed, the pattern refused to disappear. Observers stopped scanning. Snipers delayed sight adjustments. Patrols froze at reflections. Doctrine had been inverted. For years, German fieldcraft had taught that light revealed danger. Now, light meant death. And when the meaning of a stimulus changes, behavior collapses. Ashworth saw it before intelligence officers did. Kowalski noticed entire sectors going quiet. Not tactically quiet, behaviorally quiet. German units were still present. They were simply refusing to engage the environment. "They're not scanning," Kowalski whispered. "They're scared to." "That's worse than blindness," Ashworth replied. "Blindness from terrain is neutral. Blindness from fear only cripples one side." The effects multiplied rapidly. German firing discipline degraded. Soldiers hesitated to fire because muzzle flash might draw attention. Machine gunners delayed bursts. Snipers refused to lean into firing slits. The forest filled with men who could see, but chose not to. Situational awareness collapsed. Patrols walked past American positions without registering movement. Visual anomalies were ignored. Reflections were avoided. Even the faint glow of cigarette embers caused hesitation instead of action. Command cohesion fractured. Officers could not trust visual reports because subordinates refused to verify them. Runners delivered contradictory information. Radio men avoided adjusting antennas. Orders lost clarity as perception itself became suspect. Captured prisoners later described the same sensation. One private said, "We were told the American could kill through light." Another said, "If you look, you die. If you don't look, you also die." A lieutenant summarized it more precisely. "We believed he hunted thoughts, not bodies." That belief mattered. A tactic kills men. A myth kills systems. By late afternoon, Ashworth witnessed the clearest proof of collapse. A German squad halted its advance because sunlight reflected briefly off a piece of shattered metal. No one checked it. No one verified. They froze. "They stopped because of a reflection," Kowalski said quietly. "No," Ashworth replied. "They stopped because light means death now." This was not tactical defeat. It was cognitive shutdown. Trained behaviors had become liabilities. Soldiers could no longer execute the actions that once kept them alive. German doctrine had relied on reflex. Ashworth had turned reflex into a trigger for death. By nightfall, German units in the sector were no longer fighting American infantry. They were fighting the possibility of the next match. That meant one thing. The engagement was already decided. When darkness fell on December 12th, Ashworth's matchbox was empty. 48 wooden matches had reshaped an entire sector of the Hürtgen Forest. One rifleman had dismantled a sniper network designed to halt battalions. The numbers mattered. 119 confirmed kills, dozens more through artillery he enabled. But they were not the story. The story was collapse. German sniper doctrine in the Hürtgen had not been flawed. It was efficient, disciplined, and everywhere else, it worked. Ashworth did not overpower it. He invalidated it. He did not defeat better marksmen. He removed their ability to behave like marksmen. American infantry advanced not because the enemy was dead, but because the enemy stopped acting. Patrols moved without fire. Machine gun nests went silent. Resistance cracked where it had held for weeks. Ashworth did not clear terrain. He cleared mental space. After the engagement, division headquarters attempted to formalize the method. They wanted manuals, diagrams, replicable steps. Ashworth refused. He understood something doctrine rarely admits. The moment a tactic becomes standardized, it becomes predictable. And once predictable, it dies. The Matchbox Trick worked because it was personal. One man, one forest, one moment. Its psychological shockwave outlived the matches themselves. Prisoners later reported that units refused to react to light for weeks, crippling night operations and observation long after Ashworth had moved on. The trick was never about fire. It was about leverage. Ashworth found a behavior the enemy could not stop performing and applied pressure until the system collapsed. Modern militaries would later name this decision cycle disruption. Psychologists would call it reflex hijacking. Ashworth never named it. He simply understood this. A soldier is not defeated when he is shot. A soldier is defeated when he follows a rule that no longer protects him. That was the legacy of the matchbox. Not the kills, not the rifle, not the myth of a ghost in the forest. The legacy was this: victory belongs to the mind that refuses to fight the last battle. It belongs to the one who rewrites the rules before the enemy realizes the rules have changed. Ashworth did that with 48 pieces of wood and a single insight. And an entire forest of trained, disciplined professionals fell, not because the match was powerful, but because the mind using it was.